Hi everyone, welcome back to Government 2305. Today we will be talking about Congress. Now, a congressperson's primary responsibility is to the district and the constituency. The constituency are those residents of the area in that the congressperson represents. These are the people who elected him or her to their position. Now, the House and Senate offer differences in representation. The framers provided for a bicameral legislature. The legislative body, the entirety of Congress, is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Today, the members of both the House and Senate are elected by the people. There are currently 435 members of the House, which are apportioned to all 50 states by population. The Senate has 100 members, 2 from each state, regardless of population. Now, the two chambers play different legislative roles. The smaller Senate encourages deliberation and debate. It discourages specialization on particular issues because senators serve large, often diverse, statewide constituencies. Also, in the Senate, less power is concentrated in the leadership's hands. On the other hand, the larger, more centralized and organized House gives the leadership more legislative control and allows for specialization. Differences in terms of office and requirements determine how both houses develop their constituencies and exercise their powers. As a result, House members serve as well-organized local interests agents, whereas the senators serve as agent to both local and national constituencies. In other words, representatives are elected by a homogeneous group, which means that it is mostly the same, while senators are elected by a more heterogeneous group or constituency. It is important to remember the terms for both House members and senators. The terms for the House members are 2 years, while the term for senators is 6 years. Now, we will talk about representation. Representation can be sociological or agency. There are 2 circumstances under which one person may be trusted to speak or represent another. These are called sociological representation and agency representation. Sociological representation is a type of representation in which representatives have the same racial, gender, ethnic, religious, or educational background as their constituents. It is based on the background that if 2 individuals are similar in background, character, interests, and perspectives, then one could represent the other's views. The assumption here is that sociological similarities promotes good representation. Thus, the composition of a properly constituted legislature ought to mirror the society it represents. But does this really happen? Stop and consider the members of Congress. Do the members of Congress sociologically represent the United States? Now, in agency representation, this is the type of representation by which representatives are held accountable to their constituency if they fail to represent it properly. This is the incentive for good representation when the personal backgrounds, views, and interests of the representative differ from those of the constituency. So in sociological representation, we are looking for someone that is similar to us to represent us. However, we know that does not always happen, so we have to look to agency representation, where we have to consider that it is this person that is going to use their background, views, and interests to keep being our representative and therefore do what is right for the entirety of his constituency or her constituency, because they know that we will hold them accountable, and we will hold them accountable by voting. Now, the sociological composition of the U.S. Congress is not sociologically representative. Religious affiliations of members of both chambers are first overwhelmingly Protestant, then Catholic, then Jewish. This distribution is actually close to the population of the United States at large. However, we have to consider, if the legislature does sociologically represent the citizens of the United States in religious beliefs, what remains so the chambers would not be sociologically representative? Stop and think about that. Now, women and minorities in Congress are greatly underrepresented according to their proportions of the general population. The good news is most African Americans, women, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans have increased their congressional representation in the past 20 years. In regards to work and professions, most Congress members are lawyers or business and industry professionals. Now, representatives as agents. While Congress members do not share their constituents' sociological characteristics most times, they do work hard to be their clients' agents and serve their interests in the governmental process. This can be seen in the constant client-agent communication and in the 1/3 of the House members' time spent on client service or casework. They often vote along with their district's interests. Still, many constituents do not have strong views about every issue. This leaves representatives free to act as they think best. The power of an agent is not unlimited, however. Constituents also influence legislative votes because representatives that go against district wishes are unlikely to be re-elected. Now, the electoral connection, of course, hinges on incumbency. Incumbency is defined as the ability to hold a political office election after election, meaning if you are the person that is the representative or senator, you keep getting re-elected. Incumbents provide constituents with services to ensure re-election. These services provided include taking care of individual requests and regular communications with constituents to establish a personal relationship with them. The success of this strategy can be illustrated by the high re-election rate of incumbents. Most textbooks will tell you that it is estimated that 86% of the incumbents in the House were re-elected and roughly 90% of the Senate was re-elected. And this goes from election to election. Incumbency also aids the person in re-election by scaring off potential challengers. Most people will find the name recognition and fundraising skill of the incumbent too difficult of a challenge to overcome and will not even attempt to mount a challenge to them. Congress itself gains an advantage from incumbency because it keeps the status quo and social composition in Congress constant. Now, let's have a question, right? Stop and consider. Is this a good thing? Is it a good thing for Congress to keep the status quo and social composition that we see? As we have seen here recently, there have been, of course, more women elected to Congress, more women of color, of minorities. So there are changes. They are slow changes, but unless we participate, those changes won't come about at all. Now, one idea talked about on how to change the status quo and ensure fresh faces in Congress is term limits. Term limits are legally prescribed limits on the number of terms an elected official can serve, right? How many terms can an elected official serve, or should they serve? The proponents of term limits argue that such limits are the only way to get new faces in Congress. The House of Representatives are set up in congressional districts. Every 10 years, we have a process known as redistricting. We just went through redistricting in 2020. If a state gains or loses population, it gains or loses seats in the House of Representatives. This is why it is very important to return the census questionnaires. Redistricting is the process of redrawing election districts and redistributing legislative representatives. So now the question is, how are the new lines drawn? Lines are now drawn to provide political advantages to the party which controls the state legislature. The state legislature draws the new congressional maps. This is called gerrymandering. Now, for gerrymandering, I will not go into it more here in the lecture, but I have set up some notes for you online on your Canvas module. So please go and read about gerrymandering. It is an important part of Congress, not just at the federal level, but at the state level. Read the notes and get a better understanding of how these districts are drawn. Now, lastly, when it comes to the House and Senate, we have to consider that direct patronage means bringing home the bacon. Now, Congress members often have the opportunity to provide direct benefits. This is patronage for their constituents. That is that the Congress members provide projects for their districts which bring in money to their districts. This is often called the pork, right? Or simply pork barrel spending, or just pork, which is where the term bringing home the bacon comes in. The ability to bring home pork to a district increases the chances of re-election. Well, of course it would, right? If you bring in projects to your district that mean more work, more jobs, more money for your district, then of course your constituents will see that you are working for them and they will re-elect you. So now the congressperson can point to all of the acts they did while in Congress to show they brought home money to their district as proof they are working for their constituents. So how exactly does pork work? A congressperson will attach pork to a bill through use of an earmark. That is, they attach an amendment to a bill, which will allow funding for the special project back home. Most earmarks are attached to highway or military funding bills. This is because the congressperson knows there is little chance of either of those two types of bills not being passed, so there is a greater chance of being able to successfully get money to the district. Can you imagine attempting to pass a bill by itself asking for money to complete a project in one specific district? Well, that's never going to happen, right? Because you have to have it basically hidden. Otherwise, it will not pass on its own. Very rarely do very specific bills pass on their own. If you have a bill, the whole Congress is going to vote on to bring, say, $300 million to your home district to build a park. Do you think something like that would pass? What do you think about pork barrel spending in general? Stop and consider that question, okay? Because we are hearing a lot more about what is being attached to bills being passed in Congress, especially when it comes to stimulus packages. Congress people will add special amendments to the stimulus package because right now they know that we need the stimulus package passed. The constituents want the stimulus package passed. So stop and consider those questions like that. One last note on patronage, and that is that another form of patronage is a private bill. A private bill is simply a congressional proposal to provide a specific person with some kind of relief, special privilege, or a special exemption. We hear about these very rarely because they don't happen often, but it is another way of being considered patronage. Now here you will see what is the map of Texas congressional districts. These are, of course, from the 113th Congress. So the lines have changed, but not very much. I want you to take a look at this map. I think I've put it up also on Canvas by itself, and then blow it up so you can see the districts, okay? Each little number represents a district. Stop and consider, if you will, look at the very top district in the Panhandle where you see Amarillo. I believe that's I think that's District 13? I can't tell exactly what the number is. But look at all the little pink colored counties. And then if you look where Houston is, that's where all the scrunched up little numbers are over here by the Gulf Coast. Houston by itself has multiple districts, whereas if you look at that pink district up in the Panhandle, they represent multiple counties. One city versus all these counties. So Harris County by itself, in which Houston resides, has multiple districts, okay? This is one county we're talking about. Look at the rest of the map of Texas. And so you can see that if you get an incumbent up in one of these huge districts, how they can be constantly reelected, okay? Because you don't have a lot of people living in these areas. So it makes it very interesting to consider incumbents in these large House districts and how they come to be in office for multiple terms that can go into decades. Now, before I move away from the district map, please be sure and go and read and review the notes that I have given you on gerrymandering, because those will come in handy and will explain a lot more about how these House districts are formed. Okay, now when it comes to organization in Congress, to exercise its power to make laws, Congress must first organize. The building blocks of congressional organization include the political parties, committee system, congressional staff, the caucuses, and the parliamentary rules of the House and Senate. Each political party plays a role in congressional organization and legislative formulation. Okay, so party leadership in the House and Senate organizes power. Republicans conference, Democrats caucus. All that means is it's the same thing. The two parties will meet and confer. They just use different terms. Republicans conference, Democrats caucus. A caucus is a legislative or political group's closed meeting where they select candidates, plan strategy, or make decisions regarding legislative matters. At the beginning of each new Congress, which is every 2 years, each party gathers and elects their leaders. Okay? So both parties do this. They use different terms to describe it, but it's the same thing. They are meeting to organize and pick leadership. They elect a majority leader. The majority, this is a House majority leader, okay? Each party will have a majority leader. Well, the party with the most members in the House is in the majority. They will select the majority leader. The majority leader is the House majority leader. They are automatically elected by the whole House as the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is the chief presiding officer of the House of Representatives. The Speaker is the most important party and House leader, and thus they can influence the legislative agenda. the fate of individual pieces of legislation, and their members' positions within the House, and of course committee assignments. So whoever is in the majority, whichever party is in the majority, holds the power in the House. So of course it is important to be in the majority. As we saw during the elections in 2020, the Democrats narrowly kept the majority in the House. Okay, now a little bit more before we get to the Senate. The House majority, once they select a majority leader, well, the party with the minority status, with the least number of members, will select a minority leader. The minority leader is the face of the minority party in the House. The majority leader, or the House Speaker, the majority leader, there is a majority leader. So we have Nancy Pelosi right now, who is the Speaker of the House. She was selected by the House to be Speaker. There is still a majority leader under her, who would be the person in charge of all of the Democrats in the House. There is a minority leader, who is the person in charge of all the Republicans in the House right now, because they are currently the minority party in the House. So the majority leader is basically the second in command of the Democrats in the House. They are subordinate to the House Speaker. Now, once the majority and minority leaders are selected, each party then selects the party whips. The job of the whip is to line up party members on votes and convey voting information to the leaders. They're basically the go-between, right? They are the ones that are going back and forth trying to convince people to vote on projects, and then finding out how they will vote so that they can convey to the leadership. Now, in the Senate, you have the President pro tempore. That is the most senior member of the majority party. They hold the President pro tempore position. It is a ceremonial position. The power in the Senate belongs to the majority and minority leaders, and they too are elected the same way that the House Speaker is, and in the same fashion as the majority and minority leaders are elected in the House by their members, right? Now, they both perform tasks equivalent to their House counterparts, the majority and minority leaders in the Senate. Congressional party leaders are powerful because they can control or try to set the legislative agenda. They do this by putting bills before a committee or scheduling a vote on the bills coming out of committee for the whole chamber. And we will talk about the committee system in part 2 of this lecture. But for now, know that in the Senate you have a President pro tempore, who is a ceremonial position. Both the House and the Senate have majority and minority leaders, as well as the House having a Speaker of the House. Be sure to review the leadership role notes that I have put on Canvas for you. It will break down all of the party or the chamber leaders and how they are selected and what their position entails. And that is on Canvas, so please be sure to review those notes. Now here's something just for fun. We will end this part of the lecture on this fun slide. Somebody out there in the world received money to conduct a survey and research and find out what type of beer went with your political affiliations. You know, are you strictly in the middle of the road, where you are a, say, Miller High Life type of person? Or are you far right, so that you're a Shiner Bock person? Or far left, so that you're a Heineken person? This is just a fun thing that somebody out there did It does not mean that they match up exactly, if at all, but take a look at this when you get a chance on the actual PowerPoint so you can blow up the graphic and make it big and you can see all the different beer splatters and what beer corresponds to your centrist, leftist, or right view. Just know that people will give you money to do all sorts of research, so keep that in mind. Um, so we will stop here for this part one of Congress, and I will be back in lecture part 2 for the rest of Congress, and we will start with the committee system. In the meantime, please be sure you go back and review gerrymandering, the leadership roles, and take good notes so that you are prepared for your exam 1, which is coming up quickly. Until the next time, please be sure you log back in and look at lecture part 2. Until then, I'll see y'all and talk to y'all later. Bye.